I'm writing novels, I feel like I'm in a totally altered state of consciousness. And I can see the world in a completely different way, and it kind of glows and reverberates with a sort of hallucinogenic envelope around it. And I want that glow to be there. I want that envelope to enwrap the world that I make in the book for the reader, for other people.
The library was my space, and there was just so much.
To the Harbor Grace excursion with the boys to have a time.
Just this morning, breaking news, your novel was longlisted for the National Book Award down in the United States of America.
Thank you.
I believe that's the third time you've been nominated for that award.
It's true.
They got to give it to you this time.
Shortlisted twice. Now I'm longlisted, but you can't get on the short list without first being on the long list.
I think you got to win this one. They got to stop either nominating you or they gotta give you the award.
I never expect anything. I mean, except for things that I would have control over attaining and obtaining. So things like that just come as a surprise. Because I never want to be disappointed in life, you know? Like, I thought my husband just wanted to be friends for a long time.
Right.
And then I go to these ceremonies, and I'm always so excited for the winner, and the people who work in the publishing house are looking at me like, because I'm beaming, clapping for the winner, and they're like, "Are you an idiot?" You know, because I just don't.
Yeah, it's nice. You're supposed to be happy for your colleagues. You don't want to be one of these
Yeah.
like embittered writers that you encounter.
But
sometimes.
then, right after the definitely not. Yes, I want grace and dignity in my life, and I'm actively pursuing those, like
Wow.
every minute. But once after I didn't win, I was at an art opening, and a photographer, Wolfgang Tillmans, if people know who that is, German photographer, came up to me and he's like, "Yeah, I saw that you were the finalist, but I said, it's okay." And he goes, "It is better if you win."
Well, good luck.
Would you like some classic water?
Yeah. Maybe. Thanks. We're here to talk about Creation Lake. This book is really fun to summarize, so I thought maybe I would just quickly outline it for those who haven't read the book. Creation Lake is narrated by a secret agent, alias Sadie Smith, which I'd like to ask about later. Sadie is hired by a faceless private consortium to infiltrate an anarchist commune in rural France. The members of this commune have fled the city to the countryside under the sway of a mysterious ecological and paleontological philosopher named Bruno Lacombe. And they are reputed to be involved in a variety of radical acts of industrial sabotage. Sadie's role there is simple. She's an agent provocateur, at once gathering intelligence about the group and slowly influencing it towards some kind of critical, possibly violent action. And as she goes, the knot of the novel gets tighter and tighter until the climax, which I won't spoil. On the back of the book, it's billed as Rachel Kushner's rendition of noir, and noir is in quotation marks. Did you add the scare quotes to that? Was that did you want that in scare quotes?
I didn't write that description.
Okay. It's very suggestive and kind of apt for a novel
Right,
that's
because
at
the
once.
narrator makes fun of scare quotes. It's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, she obviously is not me, but at all, and never meant to be confused with me. It's fiction, and she has a lot of views about things that are not mine. She's like a kind of devil in a way. But that one thing, maybe she borrows from my observation of like very highly educated people who use a lot of scare quotes, who seem to be like installing a lot of distance between themselves and language that other people use. And so she's just kind of producing her own small riff on that. But, I see her as proceeding as though she were in a noir novel, but the novel is by me.
Why did you feel like borrowing from genre was a good appropriate form to tell a story about revolutionaries?
Yeah. Well, when I make decisions, it's not that I'm not thinking about them or that they're merely intuitive, but that is a very reasonable question that you just asked, but I wouldn't structure that question to myself in that way. I already, for a long time, had wanted to write a novel set in a very particular part of France, rural, central, southwestern France. And it would be the villages in the novel and the region of the novel would be modeled on places that I know very well. And the situation of the novel would be a group of young people who had decamped from Paris to try to build a rural life and learn farming and also learn the social inheritance of the land and the tradition of farming that's taken place in this particular region. And they live in a communal structure, and maybe some of them are involved in sabotage. To me, I have no judgments of that. And they are sort of set on a collision course with the French state. And that was something that I've thought about for many, many years, in part because I know people who have been involved in projects like that have specifically been raided by the French state. And I've watched what happened, and I've watched the court cases move their way through the legal system and eventually be thrown out. Over the many years I was thinking about this book, and also just in my private life, my married life, my social life, going to France and talking to people who are trying to live in some different way, to form some kind of protected environment inside of capitalism where it may sound idealistic, but like sharing resources and not really using money that much, and trying to subsistence farm and trying to start social programs to help the older people in these villages that have experienced intense outmigration so that very few people live there anymore. It's hard to get goods. There's no future for young people in these places. And so I've seen a lot of this, and over the time of thinking about the book, and again, like just having exposure to a lot of the details, just the personalities and the kinds of disputes people have when they're trying to live communally, I watched a metropolitan UK undercover police officer infiltrate one of these groups. And he attended some meetings with some people I know in New York City. And then he later was found to be an undercover agent by the people in the group. He had been sleeping with many different women in these groups. Like, he was infiltrating just like climate activists, These are not people who are going to cause bodily harm to other people. In Germany and France and England. And I think it was out of jealousy and not suspicion that he was a cop that somebody finally rifled through the glove box of his van. And like the van later, I even asked people, like, didn't he seem like a cop to you guys? Because you look at this guy, and like when he was with the climate people in Germany, he's like a white dude with dreadlocks and like tattoos. And then when he joined the sort of ultra-leftists in France, they're very clean-cut looking and just like wear black. And suddenly he looked like that. And I sort of thought, I know these people, and they probably just thought, oh, he's coming to his senses because he looks like us now, But so I don't think that they suspected he was a cop and that the glove box was rifled through out of jealousy, because he was sleeping with several different women, and they found a whole bunch of passports with his picture and different names on them. And he was cornered and started to cry and said, it's it's you guys I'm with, I'm started giving them false information. I've got myself into this trap. I don't know what to do. This is completely fucked. I've gone over to the other side. I've wanted to bring this up for weeks. I wanted to come clean to you guys. I just didn't know what to do. Like, let's smash the state together. And because they were going to beat the shit out of him, And then a week later, he disappeared. I keep seeing this, like the meme of Bart Simpson disappearing into the hedges. But instead of going into a hedge, he was hired in the shadowy and unregulated world of private surveillance. And as I understand it from an article I read in the Daily Mail, which is a very reputable publication, he was hired by the company that used to be called Blackwater. So, he's going in an even dirtier direction now. And the question that I asked myself was, what kind of person would do this? I mean, in that case, it seemed like a very lost person who's looking for affirmation outside of himself and doesn't know who he is. There was another woman that sort of skirted 3 degrees of separation from me, who had worked for the FBI, quite young woman. And her supervisors had her infiltrating a group of eco-activists in the Bay Area. And now I don't know what parts of it I've made up and what parts of it were real. And it doesn't matter, because the real part of it gave me the framework. It gave me like the hard wiring to make this kind of character. And I think she was getting a lot of pressure from her supervisor to produce evidence of sabotage. And one of the people in this group was vulnerable to whatever seductive force she had over him. And she sort of made him believe that it was like a necessary step in their courtship that he buy 500 pounds of nitrate fertilizer and build a bomb. And she really entrapped this guy. And he's somebody that people I know. And it was quite serious. He ended up, in real life, going to federal prison on federal charges. He had a 21-year sentence, and he served 9 years of that sentence before his lawyer was able to pull through a Freedom of Information Act proof that this woman had entrapped him. And so I kind of borrowed elements of the 2 stories to make this character, who is less sloppy than the first example I gave. She only has an affair with one member of the group. And elements of the woman, because I saw that as a kind of backstory. And maybe at the time I wasn't even admitting to myself, like, this is like the cliche of the private detective, the spy novel, that they used to work for a public agency and there was some moment of disgrace, some fall. But, we are all a product of what we read. And like how I came about deciding that that was the best way to tell the story, I won't go on much longer before you can ask me another question, but...
It's fine. This is perfect for me, honestly.
No, it's tricky because, I wasn't like, I want to write a noir novel. It was more like, I know that I can furnish my parallel universe with features of the real world that I have been fortunate enough to see up close. But it felt like a kind of betrayal to do that. And I wasn't really sure what the purpose of it was until I realized that I was stepping into the tank of a kind of enemy, a person who would have no sympathy for the people in my novel, whereas I would have a lot of sympathy for them. And if you have a lot of sympathy for them, then the question is like, what is the purpose of the novel? Like, what kind of transformation will be made? Because I didn't want her to sort of move in there and find out like that the leader is a jerk, or that things are not as idyllic as they seem. Like, that's not the message of my book. And instead, I just the way it mapped out, it was like I had her, and then I had the mentor for the group whose emails she has access to. And it's really, it operates around the poles of these 2 people, and he's the heart of the book and a very gentle, tender person. And she is a very blunt and overconfident person. And then it was a question of what would happen in between those.
I do have to ask the kind of dumb question, which is, why does she adopt the alias of close to one of the world's most famous writers, Sadie Smith.
Oh, so that never occurred to me. No, it didn't. Well, my married last name is Smith.
Okay.
So we're Smiths. My husband is a Smith, and he has Smiths on like multiple sides of his family. And my son is a Smith. And my husband has always joked that Smith is Anglo-American for last name, which is a joke that Sadie borrows in the book, and she puts last name, capital L, capital N, So Smith just seemed like a placeholder for a name. It's like, it's an alias. It's a shadow of a name. It's like when people first start writing fiction, they always say the last name is Gray. His name was Tom Gray. And it's like Gray is sort of almost, it's like literally shadowy. Smith to me is that. And then I just like the name Sadie. I don't know. And then somebody told me that Zadie's, so Zadie to me, I'm friends with Zadie. Zadie to me is just Zadie. Like if you say Zadie, there's no other Zadie that people are
Right.
thinking of
It's like
other
Cher.
than the one. And I had no idea that her name was self-given, that she was born Sadie. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
And then she was very sweet about this book. She sent me an email and she said she really liked it. And I hadn't been in touch with her in like a year. And then she said, people were telling me that there was a Sadie Smith in it. And I was completely confused. Like, why would you do that? Until I read the book and I realized there was no connection whatsoever.
Yeah, there's no connection.
There's no connection.
All right.
Yeah.
You heard it here first. The book is set in 2013.
I mean, that would be so weird.
I know it would be
right?
weird. That's why I had to ask. Because
Yeah.
it would be so weird. I don't know. It's like, yeah. I'm glad we got over that. So the book is set in 2013, but I can't say I really derived that necessarily from reading the book. One pieces it together from the fact that Daft Punk's Get Lucky is playing everywhere Sadie goes.
Right.
As it did here in Canada that summer as well, I can confirm.
Not every summer gets a song is something I've realized on my press tour. I'm making that declaration.
Okay.
But some summers really do.
Yeah.
The Summer of Kiki by Drake, right?
Did you feel that this summer had a song?
It's so funny that it's like a rapper from Canada. He's like, I'm hard. We have like
Look,
nationalized
you're from
health
LA,
insurance.
I know. We're not going down this road. I don't want to do the Kendrick Drake thing. This has been
But
settled.
no, back to 2013. It's
Yeah.
an important question, I think, or at least to me, I care about that. Were you kind of thinking like the year is not that critical because some of what happens in the book seems contiguous with the now?
Yeah, I mean, well,
Or do I flatter myself to think that?
no, you don't flatter yourself. I mean, there are resonances of this that seems like sort of prescient, like that Earth Uprisings group that sort of emerged
Yes.
subsequent to your writing the book.
Yeah.
But what was so interesting to me was that your other books are so inextricable from very precise historical moments. And yet with this one, you sort of uncoupled it slightly from its immediate historical context. I was just curious about why you decided to do that.
Well, I think maybe that's a really smart question that is slightly difficult to answer. When I write a book that takes, like The Flamethrowers, for instance, maybe that's the one that you're thinking of when you say
Telex
like
from Cuba as
very
well.
specific time. So Telex, I think, is like a different thing. My first novel, I really wanted to write a novel about this quasi-colonial environment of Americans who lived in Cuba in the years directly preceding the revolution. And it's like not a typical first novel, maybe, because it didn't have a lot of room for me in it.
And it was good.
Sorry?
And it was good.
Oh, that's so kind. But it was about a time and a place and a world and also a historical moment, quite critical moment, dare we call it, like national liberation movements the world over. And I wanted the book to be about that. And I did have access to people who'd lived through that time through my family because my grandparents had lived in Cuba, as had my mother and her 3 sisters. And I went there, and the residue of that previous world was there because Cuba shifted to a much lower pace of growth after the revolution, so that the paint on the buildings is still United Fruit Company paint, et cetera. And I really devoted myself to understanding that world and trying to produce a book that had real amplitude to it. It wasn't a character-driven book. It's really a portrait of Cuba at that time and this like sort of Baroque set of political circumstances that allowed for 12 people to overthrow a country. It's really quite amazing. And then my second book was suddenly going to be this place where I could secretly deposit my own sensibility, my sense of humor, much more of myself in the book, and that was The Flamethrowers, which was set in the 1970s and involved revolutionary politics and revolt, but I happened to be writing it during the time of the two waves of Occupy in the United States. The first was in 2009, was called Occupy Everything, when college students in the UC system where I was educated were basically like, it was the antecedent, I think, to the Occupy movement, which was happening while I was writing the book. And so there's a lot of things like the people who know me can see through what's in the book to see something much more contemporary that's sort of laid into it. With this book, because people I know were raided by the French police in, I think it was 2008 or 2009, and I had watched what happened with that, it seemed logical to me to set the book in a historical era that would be contiguous with that. And it just allowed me to make some practical decisions about when it's happening, what technology people have, and what songs are on the radio. But I chose a kind of slightly, what is it, a proleptic, is that the term? Like, the mega basin is something that happened after 2013. It's closer to now, and when I go to France in the summer to this rural area, I see how hard it is for farmers who don't have access to water. And the French state, in cooperation with private enterprise, wants to take all the water in certain areas out of the water table and put it in these plastic-lined bays. And I have this character who dwells underground and has rejected civilization and has decided that no revolution is coming, and the only alternative left for him is to revolutionize consciousness, to come up with a new way of being, a new manner of mind. But he's underground, and so he becomes very familiar with water and how it's stored in the earth and the flux and flow of the water table in fall and winter through the rainy season. And as I was writing him, it occurred to me that the earth is the most ingenious storage facility for water. It filters the water, it keeps it clean, it keeps it cold. So this mega basin thing, I had read about it, and I just needed to borrow something for people to be mad about, because there are definitely a lot of things to be mad about, but that just allowed me to sort of organize them. And then when I finished writing the book, these mega basins became a huge issue in France. And as you point out, there was a movement that formed called Les Soulèvements de la Terre, and it was almost like the book, and the book was like I was going down the slide into reality, and in the reality, there was some like matching, calibrated world, which I'm not happy that the French state is doing this to the water, but it made the 2013 seem less important.
As you point out, you write about Cuba, you've written about Italy. At what point do you feel you have permission to represent a foreign culture or history? Do you feel that a sense of permission is necessary to do that?
Well, when you say represent, it's kind of a loaded term. Like, that can mean different things. Like, I don't represent all of the American people as I sit on this stage, for instance, especially not the government. But maybe you mean to render in fiction.
Fictional representation.
Yeah. Well, I would say that I only write about things that I feel I can write about with authority, that I have a broader sense of the warp and weft of the worlds that I depict, and also a deep textural sense of like the flavors and the feel and how things look, and then an understanding of people and how they talk, and also a love. Like I would have to be a place where I want to marinate. That's a good word, right?
Okay, yeah.
So I write novels based on those places. I would never just be like, I want to write a novel about Greek fishermen, and then like go to Greece and do research. I've never been to Greece, but it's more like the other way around for me. Like I spend a lot of years in a place and I read a lot of the literature and I'm hanging out there in my private life. And in this case, my husband used to live in Paris and he translates French philosophy and translated 2 books by this commune that I keep referring to without naming. And we go to this place every summer, and my son is a caving guide, so he knows the whole underground world. And, it's payback time for all the years I raised him. So he can give me like little details.
Spelunking, fact-checking?
Yeah, he went into, we started going into these caves when he was 7. He's 17 now. And the last 2 years, he led children in as he was led. And he goes way underground, like a mile underground, through spaces where you're squeezing for an hour. And he says, in a crevice so narrow that you can't even turn your head. And then you end up in a huge cathedral, like chapel-like room with a 60-meter tall ceiling, and the walls are flocked with magnesium crystals that look like freshly fallen snow. He tells me things like that, and I put them in my books.
Right. He's making it up. He's just...
So, yeah. But you ask a fair question. Like my French publisher, they did say, after I sent them the book and they had read it, my editor said, I have to say, I'm so relieved. She loves the book, which isn't to say all French people will. We'll see. It'll be interesting. But
Who's your French publisher? Because you kind of make fun of Gallimard slightly in this book.
Gallimard? No, it was Edition Stock is my French publisher. But she said, I have to say that I was kind. She didn't use this expression like Sadie, I transpose. She's kind of white knuckling it when I kept saying I'm writing a book about France. But she knows that I'm there all the time. She knows my family. She knows my son. But when she read it, she said, I'm relieved that she approves of the book.
Okay. Now that you've published 4 novels, like sort of patterns are emerging across them, and definitely the figure of the revolutionary does seem to be such a central fascination for you.
Yeah.
I was curious about whether biographically you're able to locate the origins of this fascination.
Well, there's the deep origins where you can speculate about yourself, and I come from very unconventional people, like even grandparents probably. On the one side, like my aunt is like a radical media activist, and my parents, like we lived in a school bus for a while, and they do things their own way. Generationally, they always said they were too young to be beatniks and too old to be hippies, and also they said that the hippies were deeply conformist people who were just sort of following an aesthetic and a type of music and a manner of living, and that didn't really interest them. And they're much more political in their own way and sort of tempered and forged by the civil rights movement. My mother grew up partly in Cuba and then after in Tennessee, and was trained at the Highlander School, which trained Rosa Parks. And so maybe that has made some difference. But on the other hand, I would simply say, like, I am interested in people. People are shaped by their historical present. Part of their historical present is a set of questions about how life is organized. Is life organized in the best possible way? Do we take for granted how it's organized, And this book, there are some questions that get asked about where we came from and where we're going. And at one point, or I guess it's early in the book, Bruno says, currently, we are careening off a cliff in a driverless car. And the question is, how do we exit the car? And I think it's a fair question. And I think that young people and even, not so young people like Andreas Malm are thinking about some more radical solutions to this. And I'm just a writer and an artist. I have no solutions, and I'm not interested in polemical messages because I simply don't know. But in book form, I can think about things that matter, and these things do matter, at least to me.
One of your anarchist characters dismisses film as a bourgeois art form without any revolutionary potential. Do you feel as if the novel, or really any art form, still carries that potential?
Art, to me, renders the unseen seen. It plays a very special role in our lives, and I consider it to be sacred. And I think that it's honestly like a mystical art, because as you probably, I don't know if you experience this, when I'm writing novels, I feel like I'm in a totally altered state of consciousness. And I can see the world in a completely different way, and it kind of glows and reverberates with a sort of hallucinogenic envelope around it. And I want that glow to be there. I want that envelope to enwrap the world that I make in the book for the reader, for other people. That's not about something like people sitting through like a political meeting, trying to figure out whether to unionize their workplace or something more radical. That's a different sphere. I mean, the political sphere, I'm not saying that it doesn't matter, but I operate in the sphere of art, which is different. And I don't believe that art can be effective and freight a specific opinion of the author. It needs to do something much weirder. Something more mysterious, where I end up in a place that I didn't foresee going originally. It's like you want to traverse the fantasy, as the psychoanalyst would say.
Preparing for this interview, I revisited The Hard Crowd a little bit, dipped in and out of your book of essays from 2021, which led me to read again your work of reportage from Palestine in 2016. Creation Lake, the character of Bruno and a few others, is so much about the disillusionment and the possibility of revolution. I couldn't help but think about that essay while reading it, given the vitality of the protest movements of the last year. I was curious, how have you perceived those actions? And do you see in the current protest movements what perhaps your more disillusioned characters can't or wouldn't be able to perceive?
Wait, I'm sorry. When you're talking about protest movements now, what are you...
The pro-Palestine protest movement, the student movements.
You're talking
across
about my
America.
Palestine essay.
Yeah.
Right. Trying to wrap those things together. I went to a refugee camp that's technically inside of Israel in 2016 in preparation to contribute to an anthology that was to be published on the 50th, to mark the 50th year of the occupation of the West Bank. I don't know how much I want to say about that right now. I mean, because it can just take over,
Sure.
That was not, I had an idea of where my sympathies would lie in terms of that story and that history and that land and who occupies it before I arrived there. But it really wasn't my issue, because I'm a Californian and I'm really interested in California. I mean, 40 million people live in California. And I was in the middle of writing a novel about California called The Mars Room, and was deeply involved with our prison system, and I still am to this day. But then I was asked to go on this trip, and I was going to meet all these people and talk to urban planners and architects and activists and social workers and educators, and be traveling around for like 12 days and learn all about the occupation and talk to people who are humanitarian observers of the military court and the military prison where only Palestinians are tried. And it just seemed like an opportunity I couldn't turn down. And so I went and I chose a special project to go to this refugee camp, and they set me up with a incredible man who was an organizer in the camp, and I stayed with him and his family for 3 days and learned all about the resourcefulness of how they make life work in a place where 85,000 people live in 1 square kilometer with no infrastructure, no real water, electricity, emergency services, schools, land registration, police, mail service, everything. In any case, and 12 days after I got home, my host was murdered in the street. And so it, imposed a kind of violence in my life that I had not asked for. It was a very intense experience, and that's what the essay is about. The Creation Lake, to me, I don't feel like it's a book about disillusionment. Kind of the opposite, because Bruno, as a character, is a man who thinks that humans have some fundamental kernel of innocence in them. And I actually believe that too. There's some part of me that I don't always believe it, but there's some part of me that knows it's true. And I admire people very much who live as though it's true. And those who live as though it's true sometimes have an incredible talent for inspiring the activation of that kernel in other people. A really gentle person can get other people to behave. And Bruno has kind of left society. He's lost his young daughter. She died on a tractor when he was teaching her to ride it long ago, and he was like on the barricades in May of 1968 and lived through the 20th century of utopian ideals and failures, and as Sadie points out, let's face it, for all the ultra-left activities in Europe in the second half of the 20th century, there wasn't a single successful uprising. And like many of his generation in my book, as in reality, Bruno comes to believe that the factory worker is not a revolutionary subject. He just wants to buy a car and go to the movies and eat, semi-industrial foods. And so then, he moves to the country thinking, oh, the peasant class, peasant uprisings, like this is the true heart of a kind of real French spirit of autonomy. And then discovers that the French farmers just want cheap gasoline and they would like no environmental controls because in fact, it is very expensive to farm that way. And through this process, he ends up feeling that he has to convert his consciousness and has discovered this cave and goes underground. But down there, he feels that he has actually merged into a deep human community where, like the sedimented layers of the earth, he is in a sedimented strata of all planes of time in one plane, as though he can commune with people from the time before the written down and maybe try to divine what other people thought and felt about how to organize life, and like, did they leave messages? Are there susurrations for us that we don't know how to intuit, that we cannot hear? And Bruno thinks that he hears them, and while I would never try to convert anyone, the passages of the book did kind of end up taking on a sort of sermon-like form, at least to me. And maybe Sadie comes to be his only listener and his most devout pupil.
We'll open up to questions momentarily, but just in closing, your output has always struck me as having a really enviable cadence. Like basically, like every 5 years, it seems like you put out a novel. Just like a nice. That's just like a and very perfect as far as I'm concerned.
You don't think that's too slow? It's true.
No,
it takes
it's not
me
too
5
slow.
years.
It's good.
I mean, like I executed the novel in 14 months, but it took me 5 years to figure it out.
And I'm curious about year 1 of 5. Like after how are you feeling in that first year after you're done a book? Like, what are you doing?
It's different with every book, I think. I mean, it depends on the book. I'm traveling around, just like the fool on the plane. That's what I am right now, the fool on the plane.
This is her 13th event in 12 days?
It's true. It's 13th city in 12 days.
City?
It's a really lucky problem to have. It's so cool. I mean, I was like, Neanderthals, communes, this is going to be a goddamn bestseller, you know?
Yeah, totally.
I'm kidding. But to answer your question, you know, because writer to writer, this is probably everybody does this differently. I tend to get an instinct of what I'm going to do. And it's like an image or a topic, something that could be summarized, even if only to myself, in a sentence, and I stick with it. And I make that decision really quickly. And it's usually right before I'm finishing the last book. So it's almost like I go from one conveyance to another.
Right.
And then the process of figuring out how to write that book is an encounter with self. And I never decide like, oh, I made the wrong decision and I need to let go of that project and do something else. Like I just bite down hard and I stick with it. So it's like a weird instinct.
So that implies that you already know what the fifth
I
book
do,
will be?
yeah. Well, I have 2 books I want to write, and I don't know which one I'm going to go with.
Do the second one.